Привет, Владимир.
Hello, Vlad. Not that people really cared about economy during this past week, but still there are a lot of things happening there too. And even with the current Ukrainian offensive, there are some very strong connections. At least there definitely are a lot of discussions about Ukrainian Armed Forces potential capture of the gas pipeline is a rather serious thing. So tell us what you were observing in Russian economy during this week. Yeah, hello everybody. Economy is an important thing regardless of very rapid events in Kursk district. Because if Putin's economy goes kaboom, then this whole horror most likely will be over with. Well, still, let's start with Kursk. When Ukrainian Armed Forces started attacking this district, there was a lot of conversations started about this special station in Sudzha that is in the border between Russia and Ukraine, and that's the pipeline facility that affords piping the natural gas to Hungary, Austria, and some northern Italy customers, and Slovakia. And this is a small story, but an important story of remaining Gazprom exports to Europe. I'm not sure what's happening there in Sudzha because there is a lot of different information coming up, whether Ukrainians are controlling it or that control is limited and Ukrainian troops are just present. But let's clarify a couple things about this. Sudzha is a place where the gas metering station is located. This is an asset, a group of different measurement tools that basically measure the contracted volumes of natural gas that is being pumped to Europe. So Gazprom has a contract with Hungary for a certain amount of cubic meters, and in order to confirm the transfer and to support the payments, you need the system of meters that is acknowledged and accepted by everybody. And Gazprom are giving the data to Hungary, and Hungary is making payments based on this. If Gazprom is not controlling the station, then all these contractual relations are threatened. Gas may continue to be piped, but it gets much murkier how much was piped, what indeed was supplied, what was not supplied, and all this data will be in the hands of Ukraine, not in the hands of Gazprom. So far, Gazprom continues to pump natural gas, but there are a lot of questions about who actually controls this metering station. Next important question is how to pump gas under pressure so it would traverse the whole territory of Ukraine. And there is another station for that. It's called Compressor Station, Kursk, and it is located closer to the city of Kursk, alongside the same gas pipeline. And this is the station that creates enough pressure in the system so that natural gas, for thousands of kilometers that it has to go through Ukraine, would have enough pressure to continue flowing through the pipes. So gas is pumped by the pressure generated on the compressor station on the territory of Russia. And it flows through Ukraine because of that station. And that's an important marker, an important area. And Ukraine now would have technical capacity. Yeah, they do have that pipe going through their country, but now until this moment, they did not have technical capability to influence the flow without full disruption and destruction of the pipeline. But if they manage to hold, we don't know whether they got to this pumping station. But maybe, Michael, you can tell us more. I'm not quite sure where the heck is the front line going there through Kursk district. It's difficult to get more details out of the news, who controls which part. But what are the consequences? If Ukrainians take the metering station under their control, that would create huge issues for Gazprom in relations between them and Hungary, Slovakia, and Austria, because they need to certify the volumes of daily gas being pumped. That's the required element of their contractual obligations. So that would be a serious headache for Gazprom. But the most interesting story would be if Ukrainian Armed Forces would get to the compressor station. And here we don't know yet. It's a few dozen kilometers further from the current area of fights towards Kursk. And it seems to me if this was not the main goal, it was at least a secondary goal of UAF, because for Putin it is a very sensitive element of his infrastructure. For him, it is important that gas would still continue to flow, at least to some customers in Eastern Europe, to his somewhat allies like Viktor Orban. And of course, Ukrainian control over Sudzha may complicate this process. And of course, if they get the compressor station, that would be even a more serious story. So that's what I can say about that. I think that Ukrainians, when they were developing their offensive, they probably kept that in mind, although it was probably not the major goal of their operation. But it is a definite factor to exert additional pressure on Putin, because he does feel sensitive about anything gas or oil related. And there is another topic that is being discussed about Kursk nuclear power station, and I am very skeptical about them capturing this one. First of all, it's a huge facility. It's not just 2 blocks or some limited area. This is a huge facility with big perimeter. There will be some defense elements around the station, and basically there will be fights around the nuclear plant in this case. If you remember how Russia captured Zaporozhye power plant, it happened mostly because Ukrainian troops were withdrawing haphazardly, and Russians managed to capture it over several days without any serious skirmishes around it. Taking nuclear plant with fight, this is very unrealistic story in my mind. This will create a very serious howl on the international arena. Nuclear Safety Commission will tune in. They'll remember and remind everybody of Chernobyl. So I don't think they will be storming Kursk nuclear plant. But gas pipeline, this is a much tastier and easier story for them. And they could definitely acquire a lever on Putin, at least with a metering station in Sudzha. But if they get the pumping station, that would be an even more advantageous situation for them. Let's see how that develops. I have no information whether they managed to acquire both, but that's roughly what it looks like. Well, very interesting. Thank you very much for this analysis, Vladimir. Tell us more what's happening in Russian economy, because I understand there are no other comments about Kursk district. Nothing is fucking clear, so let's go further. All right, yeah, we continue to follow the events. But as for Russian economy, the main news of this past week that all pro-Putin commentators accepted with joy was that the weekly inflation for the first time in a long period was 0. And the last couple of weeks before that, it was slowing down. It was something like 0.11, 0.08, and that gave an excuse for very widespread conversations on Putin's media that the work of central bank is paying results, and they have finally succeeded. But I think that's a little too premature. First of all, there is a factor that started working in summer. It's seasonal lowering of the prices for agricultural products. They've been expecting that for a while. It's late this year, but it finally is here. A similar story was in March when the inflation slowed down, and that's when Nabiullina started saying that, look, we are facing deflationary process, we have won over inflation, and then it turned out to be false conclusions. And I have a feeling that this time this is going to be a false element too, and high weekly inflation tempo will be back rather soon. And you can look at the accumulated inflation starting January over 7 months. Last year, for the beginning of August, it was 3.7%. This year, it's 5%. So you can see that some weekly slowdowns, they have not really affected overall high inflationary background. What else can I say here? What's happening? And here we can use these internal discussions in the depths of central bank in Russia that they have disclosed last week. They have published on the 7th of August the minutes of their meeting, of the discussion of the key rate, the brief summary of their discussion that they held at the meeting of the directors at the end of July. And there were different suggestions being discussed there. Some people suggested move it to 16, others said let's get it higher to 20. But this is beside the target. I would highlight 4 elements that are important. First, and that's why I think that one should not be saying prematurely that 0 weekly inflation means anything. general balance of risks remains moved towards the inflationary processes. And that is cumulative all the different factors that central bank was talking about for a long time already. And first of all, it's dumping of the budgetary funds into economy. And they are already bickering in the open format between the budgetary payments hitting the economy, because they're already facing inflationary expectations, the crisis on the real estate market, the growth of issues with government bonds, and that basically is covered under lack of normalization of budgetary policies. And central bank is basically hopeful that all these emissions will be taken under control somehow, and these extra expenditures, extra influxes of money will not be happening. But as we understand, this is not a realistic scenario while the war is going. So there will not be any budgetary discipline in any near future, and additional dump of more budgetary funds into the economy will continue to speed up, to heat the inflation. Next story. The pumping of economy with additional money does not work when there is a hellish deficit of manforce, of working force, and when the power factories and manufacturing facilities are loaded to 100% already. And that's what Nabiullina addressed in her last press conference, that if you continue pumping money into the economy that's already at the maximum of its capacity, this will only turn into additional inflation. And that scenario of stagflation and recession that she talked about then becomes very real. And that is what they describe in the resume of central bank that I'm referring to. And we can put the link to the document at the bottom so you guys can read it and not trust us, but trust your own eyes. And the deficit of cadre, deficit of personnel, continues to rage in Russia. We discussed some data that in some spheres, they already are dwindling the amount of production. They're decreasing the volumes of services. For example, in a courier deficit led to slower deliveries. They officially slowing down their obligations, the durations over which they need to deliver the product. And central bank also acknowledges a notable slowdown of economic activity in June and July. So situation is bad on all sides. Inflationary pressure continues to be strong because of these budgetary funds being flushed into the economy regularly. There are no people to get to work with on the factories, and there is no external investment, so you cannot ramp up your production beyond what's already achieved. And freezing of different international payments also makes it more difficult to get components, replacement parts. And altogether, that brings all these demons circling around the torn body of Russian economy. So you can read that document. We'll put the link there. There's more analytics there about the situation that we are observing. And generally, it is a pessimistic outlook. There is no easy way out. De facto, they're expecting government to stop supporting deficit and to stop spending money in these numbers in the economy internally. But as we understand, as long as the war continues, that is not the reality. The next meeting will be on the 13th of September, so roughly about a month from now. We'll see how they will re-evaluate the current situation. But once again, I'll outline that I definitely do not expect inflation to go down. And I'm also expecting to see the project of a budget for the next year with increase of expenditures, huge deficits, etc. Speaking of deficits, by the way, we got some data for July, and here we have our usual segment. There are no miracles. Deficit grew at 1.5 times over a month. And now it is 1.36 trillion rubles. This is 2/3 of the planned annual, heightened planned annual. Remember, they reviewed the budget a bit later, and they increased the deficit by about 2/3. So if you calculate from the initial deficit calculation, that's already at 90% that they originally planned for this year. So you can see that the deficit is not under their control. A very important moment here. Remember discussions about slowing down of ocean exports of oil? in July. We could confirm that with some documents. You can see that in July, it's not critical, but notable drop in income from oil being shipped. And with that, the expenditures grew. They tried to control that early this year, and you can see it on the chart. I took them from Tinkoff journal. They're making a good analytics and spread on the dynamics of profits and losses, and you can see that income for oil and gas declined in July and expenses have grown. The deficit of the budget increased significantly too. That was the last slide. And September will be a very interesting month. We're waiting for a culmination of a few processes here. We'll see how central bank will review again their actions on the heightened refinancing rate. And they'll be starting to discuss their budget for the next year. So we'll see. I would remind our listeners that we are holding a bet with Michael that the next year military expenditures will grow by at least 2 trillion rubles compared to the current year. That is my bet. And we'll see. If that indeed happens, this de facto will kill all attempts of a central bank to fight with that inflationary process and hold their rate. And that's why I bet against it, because that's significant, right, Michael? That's why we're watching it live on air, right? And for Putin, we understand war is number one priority, to hell with inflation and Nabulina. That's what I think. Okay, in this context, I want to clarify, we returned to the matter of mobilization before, and I have a feeling that perhaps Putin will come to that matter again. Some people are thinking that he is most likely to announce mobilization after any successful breakthrough of Ukrainian Armed Forces. How big of a breakthrough Kursk district is, we don't know. And we cannot really deduce that by statement of Russian military, because they're lying, and we don't know. So if you're saying that the war is number one priority for Putin, could you imagine mobilization? Reignition of that effort? Again, from the point of view how it affects and would affect the economy, I cannot, Michael. But you understand that psychologically for Putin, what may happen now, and it's a probable real scenario, that the Ukrainian military would actually hold some parts of Russian territory for a lengthy time. And this is a FUBAR. This will likely lead to Putin taking any measures to kick them out, including mobilization, of course. And it also gives him some additional patriotic hype that we're finally defending our own land, and there is a psychological factor. It's more difficult to announce mobilization for a war effort somewhere in the other country, God knows why. And here, there is an enemy on our territory, we need to get rid of them. Psychologically, it's easier, but you understand the consequences are not going to change. If he announces mobilization, this will be a catastrophic hit on the job market and all of the economic processes. So it may be that this small operation, relatively small in the military meaning, it may have a very long-reaching consequences. And these events in Kursk district, I think they are increasing the likelihood of mobilization scenario, and of course all the negative economic spiral that will ensue after. We're facing some pretty hot weeks at the end of September, at the end of August, beginning of September, and we can see that Putin's party is getting more and more complicated, right, rather rapidly, suddenly. And once again, I would highlight that September in this regard will be super saturated with events, and we'll see how central bank will be working, what issues they'll have with the budget. But again, circling down, I want to say that central bank in their discussion on the key rate, they are actually openly blaming budgetary policies and accusing budgetary policies in being the culprit for high inflationary expectations. For incomes on the government-issued federal bonds are expected to produce super high returns and makes it more difficult as a tool to use. And without saying the word war, they're pointing all the fingers at it. So in September, we'll have these two points of view clashing, and it'll be interesting to follow them. Please do not forget to support this video with your like, subscription, and if you're watching it, don't forget to share. You can also look and find the Telegram channel of Michael and Vladimir and join them there. And most important thing, if you want to support us, please do so. You can use Patreon services or any other option you have, and that allows us to produce new content in the same volume, which I think we've been working for about 900 days without days off, but we are ready to continue because there are no days off during the war. But of course, I would need your support because it's not just me running the show. And let's see what Vladimir Milov has to continue with. Okay, Michael, so gasoline. We talked about that before. We do not know the volumes of production now because they've made them secrets in spring, but there are signs of high deficit of high-octane fuel, and that is being supported by the growth of retail prices over week for 98 gasoline. They grew for almost 2/3 of a ruble, so that is indicator of deficit. And since the beginning of the year, this one grew in cost for 5 rubles, 95 grew by 3. So that smaller number of production facilities that are releasing the higher octane fuels were damaged because of two reasons, the sanctions for spare parts and also Ukrainian attacks on them, and we can see some signs of that crisis continuing. And another thing, remember there was a red week, sharp decline week on the global markets a couple of weeks ago, and people were asking what's happening, what's going on. Right, so after rapid events of Monday, people are now looking back and asking what happened. There was some bounce back after the fall. You can see Dow Jones is somewhat recovering, but not fully. But regardless, the markets are in the recovery mode right now. You know, the main problem there, this is what we're saying, looking at the global market of oil. There is no certainty where the world economy would go. Situation is so fragile that it can go either way. China did not publish any good results. It is somewhat in a holding pattern, but the data on the second quarter on Chinese economy was very weak. Europe is also weak because all these changes and going away from Russian energy, from cheap gas, etc., also does affect their economy. The only optimism in the world is United States, but United States are also growing a set of issues, and that's why markets go nuts, because the US issue is that federal system was holding high rate for too long. They should have dropped it earlier. Inflation is rather low already, something like 3.5%, but they're not bringing the rate down because they're saying there are inflationary risks. So there is a feeling that this may slow down the economic activity, keeping high exchange rates and refusal of Federal Reserve System to bring them down. And they actually panicked a little and said that yes, in September we'll start bringing that rate down. That actually would help the markets to recover somewhat. And situation is basically such that everything is very not clear, and everything is hanging on United States, and the United States is also not in the clear. Is it a recession? Is it okay? What's going on with the economy? And then everybody starts to freak out over minutia. Bank of Japan raised their rate by 0.25%. Or, for example, in the United States, there is a jobless report coming out a bit worse than was expected. And that led to the sharpest decline since, I think, 80s of last century. And we talked about that in expectation that the global economy will restart itself and will start to grow again, the markets overheated significantly. I was showing some analytics that the fund indexes, for example, Standard & Poor's, according to The Economist, it's overheated by 40% compared with realistic cost of stock, of company shares, based on the actual price and actual production of those companies and their value. So there is definite bubble on the market. And the moment we see some negative data that may turn that situation Or maybe they can't, but they're still negative. People are hysterically jumping to sell because they all understand how fragile the balance is, and that is, it is hanging by a thread. There is no real support behind the bubble, and if anything is starting to look bad, everybody starts to run away from the market, and that's what we saw on Monday. Then different signals pacify the crowd, and everything somewhat grew back, but not to the previous positions. And here, for those who are dealing with it and who expect some of the prognosis on this, for example, for the oil prices, I want to say that the fund market is over-evaluated to such a high degree, and economic basis is so weak that there is nothing to support its growth. There is nothing to support its stability. China is minus, Europe is minus, America is somewhere between minus and plus. So these crises will likely continue. The slowest, the smallest, most negligent data coming out that is in the negative may tip the market again. And this is an interesting story that also affects the oil pricing. And due to all that, we see that after the murder of Ismail Hani, or killing rather, right, after Israel hit the general of Iran, everybody were expecting a big clash between Israel and Iran, but nothing is happening so far. And Brent is trading at the same 78%. It's not going up. But situation on the market is so bad that even Iranian-Israeli conflict cannot pump the price of oil higher than 80. And I want to pay attention to Bloomberg that published a recent article. And you can follow him on Twitter. His name is Javier Blas. He is well-known oil and gas journalist. And he is more of a bullish character. He is supportive of industry. He is saying that in perspective, there is not enough oil being pumped. The prices will grow because of growing economy. This is his main line. But right now, on the backdrop of all this uncertainty on the market, he wrote an article that says that OPEC Plus will have to understand that oil will probably retract down to $75 and will likely stay there and will not grow beyond this threshold for a while. And this is a very interesting point that actually resonates with my feelings about this matter, that the weakness of the market is also exacerbated by the fact that OPEC countries are going to exit their previous agreement in autumn, so they would likely start growing their production. And that will have interesting consequences for Putin, because perspectives over the next few months that is such that he should not expect significant income from oil, and the markets are rather volatile. In my view, this is good news for all the topics we're discussing here, and to expect some miracle, some oil at $100, probably unrealistic. Most likely it will be similar to July, when oil and gas income shrank and it grew Russian budget deficit significantly. So Putin's window is shutting down. It's interesting to see how he will behave, but situation is not giving him an opportunity to conduct a lengthy and expensive war the way he would want to. What else? Speaking of sanctions and relations with China and the countries of Global South, there will be no story with probably stopping the trade of yuans and Moscow Stock Exchange. Minister of Finance of the United States gave a waiver, extended a waiver for 2 more months to continue working till the 12th of October. And, you know, I like it. This is a very interesting carrot for Chinese banks. It seems that Chinese banks have asked for that waiver to give an extension to continue working with Moscow Stock Exchange, Moscow Currency Exchange. And Americans said, sure, China, we love you, we'll allow you to do that, but you do not work with them, please, on the export and import operations. Do not sell them sanctioned goods, and do not work with Russian gray agents that are supportive of their military industry. So it's not only punishment, but also the carrots that they're giving out. So it's like, okay, you can trade your currency on the Moscow stock, but please don't, on the Moscow exchange, but don't trade with them. In reality, for Russia, it would be more interesting to continue trade, but Americans are precluding that from happening, and I think they're rather cunning the way they work with this. I think it is correct way to treat the situation. Reuters recently published that Russia and China are facing some major negotiations between their exporters to conduct deals in the form of barter. So yeah, tell us more about that, Vlad. So barter is exchange without money. So basically by contract of exchange, when Russia is supplying metals and getting back in exchange without any money involved is getting some equipment in return worth of the price or the cost of the metals. But the problem of barter is that participants of the market still need money. So metallurgists, they don't need the machinery that they got in exchange. That machinery is needed by somebody else. Manufacturing facilities, in order for them to acquire these machines from the metallurgy company, they need to still find ways to pay the metallurgy to get these machines. So at some point of that exchange, you still need to convert that to money. And any barter is the most expensive method of dealing by the percentage of expenses that accrue on top of your cost. And we faced that in Russia in the 90s. It went up to dozens of percent over the actual cost. And yeah, the goods will reach the end customer, but the costs that will accumulate along the way for all the intermediary companies and middlemen, that'll just make everything more expensive. That's what Nabiullina is talking about, that additional expenses for all these gray, non-standard operations that erodes any effect of strengthening ruble that could have happened otherwise. So barter is just expensive. It's huge expenses on both sides, with exporters and importers both. A lot of percent paid to intermediary companies. And given that the profitability of these deals is already not sky high, it will just slow down and make it more difficult. Americans are also exerting enough pressure on Turkey. Ministry of Trade representative threatened Turkish authorities and companies that if they do not stop the flow of illegal flow of American technologies that are dual use, that are used in Russia for military production, that there will be consequences, and we'll see what the reaction would be. It's curious, but we already see that the imports to Russia from Turkey already are falling. In the first 6 months, it fell down by 28%. So secondary sanctions and additional enforcement, is actually working. A couple more items I wanted to bring up today. One is about the mortgage credits in Russia and the perspective of prices for real estate. Right, what about that bubble? Vlad, our listeners are asking, what's happening there? It's slowly deflating. That's the resume. In July of this year, according to Franker G Analytics, the drop was 57% in quantitative and 57% in monetary. So 2/3 roughly of the market cooled down, and that definitely affects the volumes of mortgage credit, given it fell by a quarter in July compared to June. By about 25%. So far, developers are still holding prices, but as you understand, it cannot affect the market price. But what's happening is very curious. You can go to any of their real estate sites in Russia, realty.rbc.ru, they have a lot of materials. But the core is that developers are trying not to bring the official price down, but what they do, they give discounts to the buyer as they negotiate. So the official price tag remains high, but individual deals are getting more and more discounts. So de facto, the price drop is already happening. It is just not officially reflected on the price tags. It will eventually seep through, of course. The bubble has reached interesting heights, I guess, in this case. 77 million square meters of apartments are still staying, not being sold. They're just on the market, finding no buyers. Remember how we discussed about Belousov's Macroeconomic Research Center writing about the quiet bank crisis in autumn, because the borrowers have taken too much credit and they cannot take credit for the new high rates that central bank still holds. These are the stories about developers, because they're neck deep in the credits and they're constructed real estate is not being sold. Many of them have left the market already. They don't have any additional bonuses on the mortgage deals and all from the government on the mortgage loans. And they can huff and puff all they want, but the objective situation is rather dire for them. And as Gref mentioned in that conference, yeah, for the mortgage market, will probably be sick for a couple of years. I think they definitely will be. And it's interesting to observe this clash with of a crocodile with behemoth. Buyers want the prices to go down. Real estate companies cannot give much of a lower price. So that definitely will affect the market. We're waiting for the results soon. Last thing I wanted to say is that near economic issues with the slowdown of YouTube in Russia, a lot of my viewers are commenting saying that indeed YouTube is slow, the speeds are low, but still somehow they make it work via the mobile devices using VPNs. So overall the audience continues to watch. And you probably saw that news that authorities are thinking in Russia about confiscating Google servers to pay for the court-applied debt to that company of worth of 10 billion rubles. And I think that's what's going to happen. They will likely start taking their servers, and that will be their easiest way to slow down YouTube. They'll just take some servers away from Google and enforce everybody who is watching it to not use cached data on the servers standing in Russia, but to download directly from some server in the United States and California. So that's what bogs down the channels and slows the speeds. I think while there are still both sides are appealing and fighting in court, and that decision about really acquiring Google's property to pay back for the fines, those 10 billion ruble fines, but I think they most likely will choose that path. And this will lead to protracted slowdown and worsening of the quality, and we'll talk separately about what to do with it. But what's curious is that, of course, on Russian media, they continue talking about if YouTube will slow down, we have some Russian equivalents, some Russian competitors to that where everybody will go. Well, we can see that there is only one competitor. In reality, it's VK Video, because RuTube is not really taking off. It has the bare minimum of viewers and nothing exciting is happening there. VK has a large audience indeed, but they are failing to find a profitability model. And this is reflecting a situation that content makers are not interested in using this network. And VK published for the first 6 months, the reporting, they said that their debt has grown 2.1 times, up to 24 billion rubles. Company is operationally in debt, and high rate of credit affects that, and also growth of expenditures also affects the current situation. So analysts are saying that despite being the close next after YouTube, it has zero perspectives of becoming profitable. And the main competitor, the proper Russian RuTube option to replace YouTube, to substitute it, is not taking off. So that would imply budgetary support and government funding. And in general, they perhaps can find these monies, but here's the thing. They need money for airplane industry, because they have issues. Russian planes are not flying. I launched another video on my channel. You can watch that if you're curious. They need money to pay to the families of the participants of war. They need to find ways to help importers who cannot get in direct trade with China and get their assets frozen or money frozen. So everything, and little by little, it all is hanging on the budget. And again, the main competitor of YouTube in Russia, VK, will be likely non-profitable in the near-term future, and that means that they will also ask for more budgetary support, which is already rather depleted. So all that is hanging at the government money and the government funds, which are depleting at a rapid pace. So it's very curious to see what will ensue once they reach a deeper crisis. But overall, speaking of Russian IT market, they failed to grow a real competitor to YouTube. One of them has the scale, but cannot monetize it. And going back to Wildberries, another sort of Russian Amazon-like company, they have scale, right? VK, Wildberries, they have scale of operations, but they do not have profit. So that's what I continue talking about, that this current model of economy with super high expenses and different aspects of it just outlines that people do not have enough money to support these companies, and the overall economy is in shambles, so it cannot support the growth of these companies. That's why they cannot continue existing without government support. So another argument that this model is very fragile. It's easy to tip it. Yes, of course, we will have to face some slowdowns of YouTube in Russia, but the fact is that Russia failed to grow a significant competitor to that, and most likely will not be able to under current regime. And again, next week, I don't think there'll be any exciting events, right? I did not ask for that, right? But this week, I think that's it. A lot of interesting things happened, and I think in the weeks to come, especially end of month, we'll be following a lot of more exciting events. Thank you, Vlad. Thank you for your review. Till later.